can I welcome Ron Mannkal.
Thank you so much, Norman and Professor Terry, and there's so many important people here tonight. I'd like to also mention that I have a lot to the School of Mines myself. I attended the School of Mines 3 times. I was never regarded as an ideal student, but in the end they said to me, Ron, if you promise not to come back for the 4th time, we'll give you a degree. Anyway, that was very kind of them. Now, my comments tonight are not in the form of a balanced presentation in any way, for 2 reasons. One is that I think a balanced consensus approach over the last 30 years has got us to where we are now with a leadership crisis in Australia. We've got leaders no longer feel comfortable in being honest and direct and forthright in what they say. They hide behind their PR flacks who put a few words in front of them. They actually have signed enterprise agreements that prevent them from actually managing their enterprises, which is a terrible thing for them to have done. So our nation's paying dearly for the last 30 years by seeing our industries wound up or exported. The missing ingredient in my mind is leadership. The second reason that this is not a balanced view is that I just wish to clearly explain what the donor intent is behind this competition, so there can be no misunderstanding. I wish to have a reference point and a comprehensive source of links and articles so that the entrants can wallow amongst it and enjoy themselves finding all this stuff that they don't find in their daily reading. It's just, in many ways, it's like traditional prospecting. If you go out looking, you're bound to find some nuggets, but usually in most surprising places, and that's the delight about exploration and discovery. It's the discovery process that makes it so interesting, and that, for many of us, is why we're in this industry. Now, why this search for leaders essay competition? What's it all about? For many years I've been greatly concerned at the lack, almost invisibility of leadership in our industry. And I'm not talking about management skills, I'm talking about leadership skills, which are quite different. The word leadership became a bit of a buzzword around 1995. Even the federal government were upset that there was a lack of leadership, and they formed a thing called the Carpin Committee. And they went out and their brief was to write a book about, and they termed the book Enterprising Nation, Leadership and Management Skills. And that book was widely circulated to all of us in the Company Directors Institute, and I seized one of these long-awaited copies and read it with delight, but I was disappointed because apart from the word leadership on the front cover, it was only about management. So they got the wrong tram, they missed it. But some of you are saying, I'm thinking this Blake Manners is a bit critical of leadership, and you're starting to count the leaders in our industry, yes, in defence of the industry. And I wonder how many of you got past your first hand with the 5 fingers, and we're lucky enough to have some of them in the room tonight. The reason for me elevating the urgency of this project is because I may be one of the few remaining industry participants who can actually remember the days when we could be honest and forthright, and they were the days that I wrote about when I was writing this history of my grandfather's commencement of his business in 1895. It's a long time ago, 6 years before Australia had a flag or a constitution. And in my way, that's when people talk about things being sustainable, I think that is a company that's sustainable. It's still got a vision and it's still going on. So that's the reason for the for the urgency before we lose people with any memory. Now, this is an hour and a half speech actually, Norman, but I've cut it down to 10 minutes. There will be a longer version appended at the bottom of YouTube that's being prepared for this book, and that will include like hundreds of delightful links which will hopefully help anyone that's entering this competition. I gave an address to the Young Liberals Federal Convention a couple of weeks ago, and I referred metaphorically to the two diseases affecting Australia, preventing us from achieving our true potential. One of the diseases I called was the entitlement mentality, but the other disease was appeasement, this weak management syndrome. And I referred to weasel words and the words like social justice, no precise meanings, but the words are used by pretentious people at times to suit them for their own benefit. Other catchy phrases that run the risk of becoming weasel words include social licence to operate, where we as an industry give ourselves a licence to operate here, there or anywhere. I know that sounds cynical, but we run the risk of shooting ourselves in the foot by adopting false logic, and the University of Melbourne has just produced a very comprehensive study, a little bit quite critical of the mining industry in this sense, because there's no definitions. What is a social licence to operate that we bask in the glory of? The theory is that it was dreamt up in Canada, the word then taken by the four major world mining companies and developed into a theme, which if they gave themselves this social licence, it would prevent mid-range and up-and-coming companies competing with them for the world's resources. Now that's just not my opinion, but delve into this University of Melbourne's report. It's very interesting stuff, and what it does, it brings criticism to us, and it might bring in another layer of regulations sitting on top of the regulations that we have. God, anywhere mining operates in the world is already covered by a Mining Act and mining regulations. Why would we invite another superimposed level of this stuff on our heads? But if we're not careful of it, we'll do that if we try to be too smart. Yeah, there's got to be something about leadership in here somewhere. There will be patient. Click. I talk about corrupt government, I talk about all sorts of things. This has led some of the mining industries to create this double tax, really, where they've got to pay governments. They know in some countries the governments just simply steal the money and it doesn't get to the people that really need the money, so you've got to pay also for the people. It's like a double tax. So this, in leadership, this creates all sorts of debates on whether things simply being legal are in fact moral, and that can be part of the study when they examine certain cases on this one. They've talked about leaders have got to be ready to defend themselves and their companies from surprise attacks, and we have David Flanagan. We're fortunate enough to have David with us tonight. Have a look at David's response to the aggressive questioning of Senator Doug Cameron. It's outlined in the book The Miners. Doug Cameron, a most unreasonable fellow, was belting David to death over this anti-mining tax, but David stood up and bopped him one. I can remember a similar attack launched by our local member Ian Taylor back in 1988. Now, Ian Taylor's on the attendance list. Is he with us tonight?
You had to fly down today.
I'm terribly sorry, but back in 1988, Ian's political advisors felt that there was some political mileage in accusing our company of not contributing sufficiently to the local community of Kalgoorlie. Well, I took out a half-page advertisement in the Kalgoorlie Miner that showed in graphic terms exactly where the money was being spent locally and where it went. And I also pointed out that Ian's political advisors were totally confused at the difference between gross profit and net profit. And anyway, the tax went away, and Ian and I remain to this day very good friends. I think the community appreciated our frank and honest explanation, which I think is the best way to go. I've asked some questions about why Steve Jobs repeatedly rates much higher as a leader than Bill Gates. When people are trying to take Steve Jobs down even while he was alive by saying, "You've never donated anything to philanthropy in your life. How could you hold your head up high?" Steve Jobs' defence was, "Well, philanthropy is not my competitive advantage. I'll leave that to others. I think I can serve humanity better by bringing better products to the market." The public shouldn't be underestimated. It appreciated the direct, frank, honest and easily explained answer. So he didn't give anything away, but he ranks right up the top of the hero leadership list. In politics, leadership's a funny thing. Mark Tredinnick, a teacher of leadership at the Department of the University of Sydney, says this: "Leadership does not have to come from the people we put in positions of power, of course, although we do tend to look for it there. Leadership is not politics. It's not management. Those are arts of the possible. They entail compromise. They produce outcomes from limited resources and a contest of interests. Leadership is about allowing the enterprise or the nation to understand itself and to make itself new. It requires patience and imagination." Now, a different country, in his inaugural address in January 1st, 1990, the first president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, called on his country in similar words. He called on his country to move beyond politics and the art of survival. He called on the nation to thrive by taking possession of its past failings, imagining a new nation and improving ourselves and our world. This he called the art of the impossible. Not because it's truly impossible, but to make it clear that leadership is the very opposite to politics. Now, Václav Havel didn't expect too much from the politicians. I do. And fortunately, we've got some wonderful political leaders with us here tonight, past and present. Now, on leadership, there is a huge difference between leadership and management, and I don't think we're doing enough to separate these things. Now, looking at mining, I've written extensively over many years on this topic, and a lot of people know of my interest in it, so they keep sending me examples of leadership comments just to prove I'm wrong. Without fail, this past 12 months I've had more copies of Mark Cutifani's articles and speeches than I've received copies from anyone else. Mark, as you know, he used to be very well known locally. He's now the CEO of Anglo-American PLC. There is some great examples of leadership, and I'm urging these young people to get hold of some of Mark Cutifani's recent speeches. Back in 2009, I was asked to deliver this Saravi Parbo oration, which I titled The Language of Leadership. This was the most effortless speech I've ever given. I just had to just quote a few things that Avi had said. It just was so easy. I was asked to introduce Charles Copeman at his induction at the Australian Mining Hall of Fame, and again, a simple speech. I just referred to his achievements. No speech writing involved, just putting it together. Again, I was asked to give a speech at the 50th anniversary of Lang Hancock's Discovery flight, and again, you just have to refer to the achievements and the style and this guy's persistence and his insistence on getting good advice on everything he did. It wasn't just working on a hunch. He drilled through to get the very best advice. These were absolutely privileges to me, and I must say Lang's daughter Gina has inherited some of those skills of drilling in and getting advice from people that really count. So, but talking about Harvey Parbo, Charles Cope and Lang Hancock, these are the people we can learn so much from historically and use as yardsticks to compare the up-and-coming crop of leaders. Where will these young people find examples of leadership for their submissions? They'll read the chairman's addresses and the CEO's report in the annual report. They'll study the media releases and the media comments. They'll read the speeches of these various mining leaders when they give speeches to the AusIMM and the Institute of Company Directors. I've mentioned several times the language of leadership. This, to me, seems to be missing right now. It's something, leadership is pretty hard to delegate, and that's why they've got to write some of these speeches themselves to get the words right. There's one example. Back in 1996, I gave a presentation in Sydney to AusIMM. It was reported in the Mining Journal in London, and a fellow called Doug Halby, a metallurgical consultant in Salt Lake City, saw the speech, and he was working for a client in Peru, and he saw it up on the wall of the office of the Peruvian mining company. He saw these words, and that after seeing our motto, he thought this reminded him of that. But the words were the language of leadership. It simply said, "It is important to eradicate the widely spread concept that finding a mine is like discovering a treasure. A mine is not a hill where there are minerals. A mine is the effort of individuals who have converted that hill into a fountain of labour and wealth. It's a product of sacrifice, of intelligence and technology, of management ability and of extraordinary tenacity." They're the words that we've got to master, and I hope the young people, when they find their way through, can capture some of these words and use them for themselves. Now, to summarise here, let me mention by definition leadership is disruptive. It's like the original creative destruction that Schumpeter, the Austrian economist, talked about. You've got to get rid of some of the old stuff to bring in the new stuff. That's why leadership is not often welcomed by management, because it is disruptive. And that's probably why it hasn't been encouraged enough. Now, I want to call on a second opinion. I just want to make sure that you don't think I'm exaggerating anything. If we called on a second opinion, we could get Shakespeare in and ask him what he thinks of the mining industry. But why Shakespeare? He was possibly the world's finest dramatist, giving us all the ability to look at ourselves without being self-conscious. We are members of an industry that find it difficult to be proud of what we're doing for some reason. Most of us have adequate knowledge of our own companies, but not a lot of knowledge of some of the other companies floating around. Shakespeare would have to research and delve deeply into this. This would give him a clear overview of the quality of the leadership, and I think he'd be fascinated to hear how these CEOs personally feel about this very vital and creative industry. Their lack of passion might mystify him. He'd be staggered to hear comments such as this, and I quote from 3 leading Australian mining companies over the years who've said, number 1, that exploration is a destroyer of shareholder value. Number 2, we are dropping the word mining from our company name as this will bring in more investor support. And number 3, we don't really think of ourselves as a mining company anymore. To these 3 CEOs, Shakespeare would ask what they were afraid of, and he'd quote the line from Othello. He would say, "Is this what you're afraid of, to be direct and honest, as it's not safe any longer?" Shakespeare would enjoy putting those words together. In some way, it reminds me of a phrase of another one of my favourite writers, Ayn Rand, who said, "The verdict you pronounce upon the source of your livelihood is the verdict you pronounce upon your own life." Shakespeare would be impressed by Professor Geoffrey Blaney's overview of the industry, where he says so often that The industry's economics and ethics are not at odds, but they are in harmony. Anyway, Shakespeare would, I'm sorry he's not here tonight actually. So listen, for those accepting the challenge of competing for this $5,000 prize, I hope so many of them will go in search of leadership nuggets, and hopefully it will take them on a remarkable journey of discovery in which they'll become personally involved and meet many of these leaders they're researching, and they'll form their own vision of leadership, and the difference can make all the difference to their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron.